Yeah, so this is it's a little bit of a scattergun approach I've taken this time. So we'll start by talking about dragonflies, their life cycle, and also some of the reasons why they're so exciting to survey. In addition to being absolutely magnificent, um, really breathtaking creatures. You can see this image here on the first slide. This is a migrant hawker dragonfly, Eichner mixta, which is one of the most common of the large dragonflies, particularly into the autumn season. Um, and he's being mobbed by willow emerald damselfly, um, which is another a relative newcomer for which Essex is very important as a species. And it is being mobbed. That damselfly is effectively trying to chase off that large predator. I need to remember the arrow keys don't work. So Odonata is the group to which all dragonflies and damselflies belong. They're divided into two um, separate groups: Anisoptera, the dragonflies, and Zygoptera, the damselflies. And they represent an ancient lineage of highly predatory insects. Typically, dragonflies rest with their spread wings, and damselflies rest with their wings closed above them like a butterfly. Although there are exceptions to this rule. And these were creatures whose ancestors were buzzing around the feet and quite possibly heads of the dinosaurs, catching um, various flying insects, other flying insects, I should say. And they breed in water. They have an incomplete metamorphosis, consisting of a larval stage that lives in various bodies of water, including, as we'll discuss later, possibly even your garden pond. So, why do we survey Odonata? They're quite familiar, they're magnificent, and they're relatively easy to survey because they're largely conspicuous, strongly flying aerial insects. And also their distribution is very strongly affected by climate. And Britain is on the edge of many species range. So we sort of we bridge several climate zones, so to speak, in the UK. And um, as as the climate changes, the distribution of a lot of species of dragonfly and damselfly is changing, and that's why we consider some of them to be climate change indicator species. They can also give us hints about the water quality and some of the other habitat characteristics around them. And many of them are threatened or declining for various reasons, including habitat loss. Many of them depend on particular sorts of wetland, and also because of climate change, whereas others are common and increasing as the climate warms. So this is one of the losers of the climate change struggle. This is Aishna Jansea, the common hawker. I took this photo during a brief spell of cold weather on the Isle of Skye last September, and that's an absolutely beautiful dragonfly, and it's called the common hawker, but it's far from common anymore in the south. It's a dragonfly of heaths and moors and acid bogs on grassland sphagnum bogs, and they have virtually disappeared from the south of England. Now there are a few still clinging on in Dorset, where the habitat is just spot on, in the Dorset heaths, but they're largely confined to northern England and Scotland, including the Scottish Highlands now. But we have had some winners. Here are a couple of the winners that have shown range expansion. Both of these colonized Britain during the 21st century. These are the southern emerald damselfly, the lovely lemon and lime pie markings. Um, on the left with the two-coloured pterostigmas, which are the little markings in the corner of the wings. And on the right is the scarce emerald damselfly, Lestes dryas, which I encounter much more than the regular emerald damselfly in Essex, although they're distinctly hard to separate, I should stress. And these beautiful, beautiful little creatures, in addition to some others, are really starting to grace us with their presence. The Lestes barbarus was on an Essex Wildlife Trust reserve near Basildon. If you know, you know. And it occurs where it relies on ditches that dry out in high summer. The eggs require that period of dryness, and so there are relatively few species that can thrive in that. But with some of the summers we've had recently, parts of South Essex have become very appealing to the southern emerald. So it is worth keeping an eye out for that species if you're walking around, particularly where there's lots of what's called sea clubrush, which is this green spiky plant that they're both sitting on. So they can tell us a lot about the changing climate, and really they're really worth watching for that reason. Dragonflies, these are scarce emeralds again. I include probably more photos of scarce emeralds than is perhaps proportionate to their scarcity, because they're one of my favorites and they're one of the ones that I got to work with, and they are actually doing quite well across several of our reserves in Essex, both ours and other conservation organisations. So they're well worth keeping an eye out for. And this is a mating pair of adults, and you can see they formed this heart shape, which I think is quite appealing. And here they are laying their eggs as dragonflies do in the water. This photo was taken at one of our sites near Thurrock, at Oliver Road, and these are two, the green form and the blue form of emperor dragonfly, ovipositing there with their abdomens in the water. And from there we go on to the larvae. So on the left you've got the larva of a dragonfly, and on the right a damselfly. The three prongs at the back are their gills that they use to breed, and even in this larval form they're still highly predatory, and the larger dragonfly nymphs will take sticklebacks, other dragonfly nymphs, fish, small fish like sticklebacks, fish fry. They are voracious predators. And as I said in the butterflies presentation last time, you could think of this is a phrase that my partner Emma Bigford has told me that I must attribute to her. The caterpillar is the animal, whereas with the dragonflies, you could make a similar case, because the dragonfly is the larva for up to 3 years. The southern hawker dragonflies can be a couple of years in your garden pond before they emerge as adults. And the adults live longer than butterflies. They live a couple of months, but they're really there to distribute the genes and to colonize new sites, whereas they spend a lot longer underwater like this. And unlike butterflies, you can see how you can see the similarity between these larvae and the adults. You can see the small wing cases on both individuals, the segmented abdomen, the 6 true legs. You can even see the difference in the shape of the head, with the damselfly sort of hammer-shaped head appearing. And that is sometimes thought to be a feature of more basal insects, and an indication of their ancient lineage. It's sometimes thought that the more derived insects have more marked differences between their larval and adult forms. and they undergo incomplete metamorphosis, as I say there. They don't have a pupal stage. The larva will climb out of the water on a reed stem, and its skin will split, and the final instar will emerge from that as the fully formed or almost fully formed adult dragonfly. They still take some time to get their color. So if you see a little pale damselfly or a very washed out looking big Eichnid dragonfly, particularly if it's away from water, because they clear out away from water quite often as soon as they emerge to avoid competition from the breeding adults, particularly if it's sitting still hanging on a hedge some distance from water. That's a teneral, as they're described, which is essentially a juvenile adult that's still getting his full color. And here's an example of a dragonfly in his full glory. So this is a ruddy darter. This is a near ubiquitous dragonfly of some of the wetlands, particularly the coastal wetlands and grazing marshes around Essex. This was taken during the very hot spell we had in the summer of 2022, and he's in this obelisk position, which the darter dragonflies are known to take up when it's very hot, probably to lose heat. And I've seen them doing that. I first saw them doing that in Greece, and now it's necessary in some summers in Essex. And I thought that's just quite a nice pose with the summer sunshine on his wings. And as I say, highly predatory. This is a scarce emerald damselfly, and I wonder if it's because of the attitude of the blue-tailed damselfly that it is eating. If it had simply landed, if it had simply landed on top of it looking for a perch and taken the opportunity to have something to eat. So yeah, this is a scarce emerald damselfly eating a blue-tailed damselfly at at a reserve in South Essex, at Old Hall probably. And this I thought this illustrated quite nicely their predatory nature, and was also a lovely photo um, of one of our commonest dragonflies being eaten by one of our rarest. So moving through some of the species that we might find in Essex, on the left you see the small red-eyed damselfly. This was taken, I think, possibly at Fobbing, where they breed in the Borrowdike. I get the impression they can possibly tolerate slightly brackish water, although someone might correct me on that. There are no marine insects, but some of them do seem to have a tolerance to higher levels of salt than a lot of invertebrates. And their oviposition is really interesting. It looks like a terrible trust exercise, in which the female will be fully immersed in the water, laying her eggs, while the male is above the water, acting as a lookout for predators or rival males who will guard her. And then they will both take off out of the water. On the right, there are common blue damselflies, which are one of two very common blue damselflies you might encounter in Essex, the really electric blue damselflies. They're readily separated in good photos or in hand by the black spur on the black spur on the thorax of the azure, the small marking just below its shoulder stripes. I'm pointing at it with my mouse, which of course you can't see. And behind that, on the first segment of the abdomen, or the second segment of the abdomen, I should say, the large segment just after the thorax of the dragonfly, you can see a shape a bit like a tuning fork on the azure, and on the common blue you can see what looks like a little topiary box bush, a little blob on the stick. And they're quite well coded by the markings on their segment too. When I was working in Scotland, I met the northern damselfly, which has a marking in the shape of a spearhead or an ace of spades on segment two. And down in Kettenton and quite possibly a few places closer to home, you get the variable damselfly, which has the shape of a wine goblet on segment two. And so here are some of the familiar ones that there's the one on the right you might find in your garden pond. That is Pyrosoma nymphula, the large red damselfly. And I find it quite wonderful. I find the more you look at it, the more you see the intricacy of its markings, the metallic look to the top of the thorax and the dark metallic bands around the tail end of the abdomen, and its dark red eyes. And so it's one of the first dragonflies to emerge in spring. So you can encounter this in April and May, and they will be crawling out of your garden pond potentially. And on the left is its nationally scarce relative, the small red damselfly, that is confined to streams and moving water in these acid environments. I think I just included that because I was quite pleased to have seen one. I saw him in Dorset the other week. Um, yeah, and this is another one. First colonized the British Isles in 2007, and is now, I find, near ubiquitous where there is vegetation fringed waterways in Essex and Suffolk and Kent. It's really, really spread. I found one the other day before, just whilst out walking from my front door on Marsh Farm. So this is a dragonfly that is going from strength to strength, and it's one of the exceptions in that although its larva is of course fully aquatic, like all of the dragonflies and damselflies, it doesn't actually lay its eggs in water. It lays its eggs in stems above the surface of the water. It cuts a small groove. You can see the female in the top photo, the slightly thickened end to the abdomen. There's a structure there that's almost like a blade that she uses to cut a notch in the marginal vegetation or the overhanging vegetation and lays her eggs in there. Perhaps it gives them some additional security from aquatic predators, although presumably it would expose them to a different suite of terrestrial predators, but perhaps they're well enough concealed. And this isn't my photo, so I can say that it's there because it's absolutely stunning. This is Calopteryx splendens, the banded demoiselle, related to the beautiful demoiselle of the West Country streams, but this is the version we get in the east of England. And I've seen them on the River Ingrebourne in great numbers in some years, down in the metropolitan part of the county, near the near the former Hornchurch airfield, where we have one of our visitor centres. And they're a specialist in moving water, particularly fast moving water. And they're also very mobile. So they're one of the ones that you might find wandering the countryside, apparently a long way from its breeding habitat. So moving on to the dragonflies, the bigger ones that we're all really here for, them tend to be much more powerful flyers than damselflies, and they share completely their predatory nature. This is the black-tailed skimmer, Orthitrum cancellatum. This is the male, and this is the female. A lovely golden colour, in contrast to the blue of the male. And it's a common species near still, clear water in June to August. They love to bask on paths. You quite often find them just sitting on the path in front of you for stock still, and then as you approach, they'll be away in a flash. And a good place to see them is at Chafford Gorges, our reserve there. There is a very good population of black-tailed skimmer, and at Tollesbury Wick, and almost anywhere there are paths. There's water, clear, cold water for them to breed in, and where there are nice gravel paths or exposed soil for them to bask, because they love basking. This is a 4-spot chaser. I personally think it's got 10 spots, but perhaps it's got 4 spots, 5 spots on each side. Perhaps it's got 4 spots on the front pair of wings. So this is the 4-spot chaser. They roost in big aggregations. There are sites in Somerset, on the Somerset levels, where people go for hundreds of miles to see them clinging to every reed in May and June in their communal roosts, and then take off en masse in the morning. It's something quite spectacular to see. I've seen the roost forming up with them drifting in, almost like if you've seen a migratory hirundine roost, when you see all the swallows gathering. It's quite a spectacle. And that is found in Essex. It's one of our commoner large dragonflies, and it quite often does this fairly obliging thing where it will sit still on a reed until it sees an insect go past, in which case it is capable of a remarkable turn of speed, as I'm sure you imagine. This is one of its close relatives. This is a broad-bodied chaser. This is the female. So you can see that it's still got the dark on the wing roots and the dark pterostigmas, but it doesn't have the additional spots. It also, to my mind, creates the impression of the wings set further back on the body. And it has this wonderful broad, slightly flattened looking abdomen. And this is another one that seems to be increasing in its range and distribution around Essex. This is the scarce chaser, not nearly as scarce as it was once. This photo I took this year in the course of my current role, in a garden, in a community garden near Malden, off Washington Close green space, where they're looking after a pond and some other vegetation. And this is a female scarce chaser perched up on a bit of vegetation there, waiting for whatever comes past, in terms of small insects, in which case she will be on it. And she was hunting very actively while we were watching her. And I think that the males are blue. They have quite a similar body pattern to a similar color pattern to the black-tailed skimmer that we saw earlier, but hairier in the thorax and obviously slightly bulkier, with these dark wingtips. And now this is a much more common species. This will be very familiar. This is the ruddy darter, Sympetrum sanguineum. Its scientific name obviously reflecting the deep blood red colour of the male. And it's ubiquitous around our Essex coastal marshes, particularly in July and August. And it has all black legs, which will distinguish it from the one we're about to see in a second. The female is golden brown in colour. This is a male. And this is a male common darter, which is one of the real autumn dragonflies, one of the beasts of that season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. I've seen them in great numbers basking in the low autumn sun on the top of benches from Rutland Water to South Essex. They occur right up to southern Scotland. They're very widely distributed in Britain. You've got the distinctive twin stripes on the thorax and a hint of a yellow line along each of the legs, which distinguishes it from the ruddy darter. if you happen to encounter a crowd of these, they tolerate each other and can gather in quite big numbers. Um, it's sometimes worth just holding out your hand and seeing if they'll come and land on you. The last time I did this presentation, we took a group of young people out onto a nature reserve, and a young lad did exactly that, and a common darter just landed on his hand, and I think that it was a moment that will stay with him. So there's something quite magic about their confiding nature. They may not be the most glamorous, but there's something about them. They're little characters, common darters. So moving on to the last group, the hawkers, the really spectacular one. Some would argue saving the best till last. Um, this is a hairy dragonfly, or hairy hawker, it's sometimes called. You can see that it's got a dusting of hair on the thorax and underneath the abdomen. And this is one of the first large dragonflies on the wing. So if you see a large dragonfly in April or the first half of May, it is one of these. It is a hairy dragonfly, and they're very busy. They seldom settle. I was amazed to capture this photo this spring. This is the Norfolk hawker, a dragonfly. The If you see a dragonfly which is largely brown with green eyes and a yellow, what's called a frons, I suppose, a face, if you like, with clear, as in not tea-stained looking wings. It's probably a Norfolk hawker, no longer confined to Norfolk and now breeding in places like Rainham Marshes and Fingering Hoe Wick. And it loves grazing marshes. So there is some really good habitat for it around the Essex coast. And this is the brown hawker, one of our largest dragonflies. It's quite similar to the Norfolk hawker, but it has brown eyes, and it has this curious tea-stained appearance to its wings, and it doesn't have a marking, a T-shaped marking on segment two, which will distinguish it from a couple that perhaps I should have put in the presentation before that, so it made sense. So here we go. This is the migrant hawker, which is a medium-sized hawker dragonfly. It's not one of the biggest. And you can see if you look very closely on that segment two, so right at the top of its abdomen, where it almost where it joins the thorax, you can see a little yellow golf tee shape, and that's the T marking. And there are variations on that theme in several of the big dragonflies, and you quite often see them patrolling waterways at Fingering Hoe Wick or at Ingrebourne Valley, and it's one of the most numerous large dragonflies in autumn at the other end of the season to the hairy dragonfly. And it has a cousin, another new colonist. Um, This is the southern migrant hawker dragonfly, which is a slightly confusing name, given that the migrant hawker and the southern hawker also exist. So it's sometimes called the blue-eyed hawker. If you notice the blue eyes, bright blue eyes, the blue flush to the frons and to the thorax, a sort of blue wash over the pale green thorax in the male. It's an absolutely stunning creature, and I like the if you look at its segment two, it has if any of you are familiar with the comic book character Deadpool, it has a sort of a Deadpool mask on segment two, which is distinctive. And this is another of the big dragonflies of summer, and this is one that's bred in my mum and dad's garden pond in Upminster, which is just a little pond, a little concrete pond in a rockery full of pondweed and water lilies and a little bit of marginal yellow flag iris. And they've certainly bred in there, and you can see it. Sometimes I've encountered them at quite odd times of year into the early autumn. And you can see when it's in flight, it's got these big green headlights just behind its eyes on the front of its thorax. So that's the southern hawker. That's the one you want in your garden. And this is the emperor dragonfly. This is one of my photos taken at a site in Thurrock. It's our joint largest dragonfly in the UK, with the golden ringed dragonfly, Corduligaster boltonii. Look up the gold ringed dragonfly. He's not in Essex, so he doesn't get a slide, but he really is an absolutely phenomenally beautiful creature. And he lives in fast flowing streams. His larva specializes in clinging onto the bottom of fast moving streams. But the emperor dragonfly, I digress, which is this rather magnificent beast here. This is a male. Is found in a variety of water bodies. I've seen them ovipositing in public in fountains and formal ponds in formal gardens in London. So they do occur in a range of habitats, and they do get about. They do have quite a big distribution over the southern half of the UK. If you go into Scotland, any dragonfly on this scale would be a gold-ringed dragonfly. And so that's an introduction to some of the species that you might find around the county if you go out and have a look. So please, please do and survey and get your sightings in via perhaps via apps like iRecord, or alternatively send your records into Essex Field Club or to me, and I'll pass them on to the relevant people, because it's really important to build a picture of the distribution of these species and how it's and how it's changing. So this is an ovipositing southern hawker dragonfly. This is the female, all green, and she's ovipositing in what looks like a small body of water, like the garden pond. So this is my tiny offering of a garden pond. So it's just a ready-made pond liner sunk into the ground with a few marginal plants and some oxygenating plants stuck in it. It's not been there very long. We have had dragonflies in the garden, but we don't know whether any of them have used the pond yet. But this is hopefully going to be our dragonfly magnet. Not all of the species you've looked at will use garden ponds. Some of the species, as I say, are very specialist, like that lovely southern emerald damselfly, for instance, would not turn up in a garden pond. But some do. Southern hawkers and large red damselflies particularly love garden ponds. We've had both of those species breeding in a pond in Upminster, and I'll show you a photo of that later. And they all rely on shallow water and abundance of invertebrate prey for the larvae to eat, and good oxygen levels as well. So you could include oxygenating weed in your pond. We've got lots of hornwort in there, which is a native pond weed. Don't put pond fish in. I know that some people say that the pond needs a top predator, but the dragonfly larvae and the diving beetle larvae are your top predator in your garden pond. You don't need to add a fish. You have a lot more diversity without a goldfish in there to eat everything. If you need a bit of additional oxygenation, I wouldn't recommend using a big pond filter or a big water feature like you might have in a fish pond, simply because the small larvae can be sucked into it, and obviously that won't do them any good at all. But the little solar powered floating fountains that you can get now, they can be quite good. I've seen those in use successfully in some community ponds that I've worked close to, and they seem to keep the water just moving a little bit and just provide that extra little bit of oxygen that might sometimes be required. And a pond is one of the best things you can do to increase the biodiversity of your garden. And this is just a photo. It's not one of mine. It's again another one from WildNet, just to show the importance of marginal vegetation to dragonflies and damselflies. So this is the exuvium, the shed skin of a dragonfly nymph on marginal vegetation. And they don't. Not all species necessarily use marginal vegetation. I found damselfly exuviae quite high on the dam wall at Abberton Reservoir, but they do certainly benefit from it. So include some marginal vegetation, and this is the pond in Upminster in which southern hawker and large red damselfly have both been recorded breeding. I haven't credited this photo. Thanks, Dad. This is a photo by Ian Atwell, my father, and it's the garden pond, a little concrete garden pond that has supported dragonflies. So really, any pond you can put in your garden is worth it. And also consider the needs of the adults as well. The adults feed on other insects, small insects. So an ecologically friendly garden that has got plenty of plants that favour pollinators, that welcomes flying insects, and that avoids using chemical insecticides will welcome dragons as something of an insect buffet for them. And they need places to perch and bask as well. And as I say, there are many species that can be found some way from water. So if you don't have space to include a pond, don't rule out the possibility of some Odonata arriving briefly. But a pond really is what you need to have them see out their whole life cycle in your garden. A fishless, well-vegetated pond. And so thank you very much for coming, and happy dragonfly spotting. I'll leave you with that same photo of the scarce emeralds, and I'll happily take any questions anyone has. Thank you for listening. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was brilliant. So interesting. And I must report that in our I live in quite an urban area in Romford, but we inherited a pond when we got the house, and we have had red damselflies in our pond. Large red damselflies
Large
in
red
our pond.
damselflies.
Yeah, so yeah, it's been lovely to see. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to either pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah. So I've got a question in the chat from Kevin, and he's asking me what their main predators are.
Good question.
So yeah, in the nymph, the larval phase, their main predator will be medium-sized fish, which will hoover them up. Occasionally, these can be a threat to them while they're starting to emerge as well. There are lots of birds that will take dragonflies and damselflies. Although the big dragonflies are incredibly agile. I don't know if you've ever come across hobbies, which are a summer visiting bird of prey, which sometimes they take hirundines, swifts and swallows, but largely they will feed on damselflies over wetlands. They're a great. I wouldn't worry about that, Kevin. The pond near a bird feeder is not a problem. Although make sure the bird droppings aren't falling in the pond, because that would affect the water quality. But they're not. You don't need to worry unless you're feeding hobbies. Then you do.
I think we've got a question from Diane.
Yeah, should we take Diane's question? Fire away, Diane.
Well, it's not mine, John. It's Jenny, as usual. Do newts eat the larvae?
Do newts? Yes, they'll eat the small newt. They'll eat the small newt larvae. They'll eat the small newt larvae for sure. And some of the larger dragonfly nymphs will take newt larvae.
And do the newts eat the dragonfly larvae?
Yes, they'll eat the small dragonfly larvae. The adult newts will eat the small dragonfly larvae, and then the well-grown dragonfly larvae will eat the small newt larvae. So it's really, yeah, it is brutal. It is brutal down there in the water.
Second question, if I'm allowed a second one.
Yeah, of course.
I need to sort of take some of the vegetation out of my pond. It's not very overgrown. I was thinking of doing this in the autumn. I have had dragonflies in the pond. And what I do to make sure that the larvae are safe while I do the sort of trying to take out some of the vegetation?
It's always tricky to do that, because with any kind of management at scale, there is always that risk of a few casualties. But the best thing you can do is leave the vegetation at the side of the pond, so that the pond is down from it. And they will typically be able to crawl back into the pond. They will be well aware that the water has gone, and they will instinctively go downwards to find it. So if you just leave the vegetation at the side of the pond for a couple of days after you've done it, until the vegetation is fairly dry. Yeah, if you have one.
Okay.
If you have one. What we've done in our little pond, can't actually see it. At the left-hand side, there's a pot full of gravel, and we've put things on to put blanket weed that we've taken out on top of that to let everything escape.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't. Yeah, I hope that's a. I hope that's an answer.
Is autumn the best time to do it?
I would have thought so. Yes.
Does water temperature make much difference to their ability to escape?
Yes, it will do, but it's a period when the pond is relatively inactive.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've always done things like that. I've always thought of those sort of things as jobs for September or early October, when the water temperature won't be that low yet.
Yeah.
So
that's
while
better than in winter.
I would have thought so. I'm not totally certain. It might be one of those questions where you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. But my instinct would be to do it in autumn. Yeah.
Do the dragonfly larvae stay active during the winter, or do they sort of go a bit comatose in the mud?
A bit of both.
Okay.
A bit of both. But you know, September, your pond shouldn't be that cold. So they should still be active and able to wriggle out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Gail asks if I can recommend a planting list of native pond plants. Probably not is the short answer. I think purple loosestrife is always beautiful. That's a marginal plant that the dragonflies can use to climb up. That's also pollinator. Excuse me. That's also very pollinator friendly. So you could try that. I quite like water forget-me-not. It's another pollinator friendly one. Some of the rushes. It also depends on the scale of your pond as well, because if you have a particularly large pond, things like lesser reed mace and common reed would be, might be worth planting. So you've got some of those big native marginals. Whereas if you've got a pond that's on the scale of mine, they're obviously those plants are no good at all, because I just have a reed bed, then a leaky pond, then a dry bit of garden. Yeah. But do look out for pollinator friendly and native species labels. There is quite a good market for native species pond plants, particularly marginals. Hornwort. Use hornwort rather than elodea as your oxygenator. And steer clear of stuff like parrot's feather, which has the potential to become invasive, even though it's extremely pretty. That's a non-native. I hope that answers your question, sort of. But yeah, yellow flag is native. Ragged robin is a lovely native marginal. And yeah, hornwort is my go-to as an oxygenator.
John, it looks like there might, if I've understood it right, there's a question from Alistair asking, what are your tips for identifying this small creature that's so often on the move?
Apologise. Learn the way they fly and the heights at which they fly. Obviously, this has been a very basic introduction to dragonfly ID, but that would be one of my hints. And learn about the habitat that they're in, because quite often you can substantially narrow it down. If you're out on an upland moor in the north of England and you see a blue and green hawker go past, it's unlikely to be a migrant hawker. It's definitely not going to be a southern migrant hawker. It's more likely to be a common hawker. So get your eye in with the habitat and the way, if they're gathered in a big hawkers in a big group, and in autumn are nearly always migrant hawkers. The others will keep much more distance from each other, the other big hawker dragonflies. The blue-eyed hawkers will tend to stick fairly close to water and hawk up and down ditches. So yeah, get used to the way they fly and their sort of micro habitat selection. And the other thing you can do is invest in a good camera, because if you've got a decent camera, it takes some learning, but you can, with an entry-level DSLR or a decent bridge camera, for sure, you can freeze these moments, and then you've got all the time in the world to identify your photos. And get yourself a good guidebook. There are a couple of those out as well. Yeah, but I would say photography and learning their flight patterns and habitats from a good reference book would be what I'd recommend.
Lovely. Thanks, Alistair, for the question. Thanks, John. Is there anybody else got any other questions?
Some of them also have quite very distinctive sort of combinations of colours and markings, like that Norfolk hawker with the green eyes and the yellow fronds and mostly brown is unmistakable, and even in flight. So I think once you get your eye in, you'll find that there's a learning curve, but you'll get that. Sorry, Hannah, I beg your pardon. I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was just asking if anybody else has any questions. Okay, lovely. Well, what we'll do, I know a couple of you are asking if there's a recording because you joined late, which is absolutely fine. Yes, we recorded the session, so we'll make sure we share the link afterwards, and we'll probably send around some feedback as well. So it'd be lovely to hear your comments and future subjects that you'd love to hear about as well. So huge thank you for joining.
Please do. They're there will hopefully be another 2 of these over the course of the summer, all being well. So yeah, do keep us posted, because the subjects of them are far from set in stone. So yeah, get in touch if you've got any thoughts, anything you particularly like me to share what little I know about, and by all means.